Charles Benson, a highly successful CEO who, despite his company's achievements, senses something amiss beneath the surface. Determined to uncover the truth, Charles makes a bold decision. He disguises himself as a janitor and steps into the world of his employees to witness their true behavior. What should have been a simple observation turns into a profound discovery when he finds that his company's culture is far from what he believed. Why did Charles's undercover journey lead to such dramatic outcomes? How did this experience reveal hidden truths and inspire a radical change in his company? Stay tuned to find out. And before we jump in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if this story of integrity and redemption resonates with you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Charles Benson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, gazing out at the bustling city below. At 45, he had achieved what many considered the pinnacle of success: CEO of TechVision, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. His journey from a small town in Georgia to the top of the corporate world in Silicon Valley was nothing short of remarkable. As he adjusted his tailored suit, Charles couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. TechVision had just closed another record-breaking quarter, and their innovative AI solutions were revolutionizing industries across the board. Yet, despite the company's meteoric rise, a nagging feeling had been growing in the pit of his stomach for weeks. "Mr. Benson?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 10 a.m. is here." Charles turned from the window, straightening his tie. "Send them in, Sarah." The door opened, and in walked Jessica Chun, head of human resources, and Marcus Thompson, chief operating officer. Both wore expressions of concern that matched the pit in Charles's stomach. "Thanks for coming," Charles said, gesturing to the sleek conference table. "I think we all know why we're here." Marcus nodded, his usually cheerful demeanor subdued. "The employee satisfaction survey results?" "Exactly," Charles confirmed, taking a seat at the head of the table. "Jessica, can you walk us through the highlights? Or should I say lowlights?" Jessica pulled out a tablet and began swiping through charts and graphs. "Well, it's not great news. Overall satisfaction is down 15% from last year. We're seeing significant drops in areas like work-life balance, feeling valued, and trust in management." Charles leaned back in his chair, brow furrowed. "What about the open-ended responses? Any common themes?" Jessica hesitated, glancing at Marcus before continuing. There were quite a few comments about a toxic office culture. People feeling overworked, underappreciated. Some mentioned favoritism in promotions and project assignments. Marcus interjected, "But Charles, we have to take this with a grain of salt. It's been a challenging year with all our growth. Some growing pains are to be expected." Charles held up a hand. "I hear you, Marcus, but these numbers and comments are concerning. We can't just write this off as growing pains." "What do you suggest?" Jessica asked. "We could implement some new team-building initiatives, maybe look at our benefits package dash." Charles shook his head, cutting her off. "No, I think this goes deeper than that. Something's off with our culture, and I can't put my finger on it." He stood up and began pacing. "We've got all these fancy metrics and reports, but I feel like we're missing the real story." Marcus and Jessica exchanged glances, unsure where their boss was going with this. Charles continued, "I've been thinking a lot about something my old mentor used to say. You can't really know a company until you've walked a mile in the shoes of its lowest-paid employee." "What are you suggesting?" Marcus asked, a note of concern in his voice. Charles turned to face them, a spark of determination in his eyes. "I think it's time I got my hands dirty. Literally." Jessica's eyes widened as realization dawned. "You can't be serious." "I am," Charles said firmly. "I'm going undercover. As a janitor." The room fell silent for a moment before Marcus burst out laughing. "Go on, Charles. You really had us going there for a second." But Charles didn't crack a smile. "I'm not joking, Marcus. I need to see this company from the ground up. No filters, no sugarcoating. I want to know what it's really like to work here when people think the boss isn't watching." Jessica leaned forward, her voice low and urgent. "Charles, with all due respect, this is crazy. You're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. You can't just mop floors for a week." "Why not?" Charles challenged. We contract our janitorial services through an agency. It wouldn't be hard to get myself placed here as a new hire. Marcus, realizing Charles was serious, shifted into problem-solving mode. Okay, let's think this through. How will we even pull this off? You're not exactly anonymous around here. Charles grinned, feeling energized for the first time in weeks. That's where you two come in. We need to create a foolproof disguise and backstory. Over the next hour, the trio hatched a plan. Charles would become Charlie, a middle-aged man down on his luck, looking to start over with an entry-level job. They decided on a simple disguise, a pair of thick-rimmed glasses, a short beard, which Charles would start growing immediately, and a slight change to his usual hairstyle. What about your family? Jessica asked. Won't they wonder where you are all week? Charles's expression softened. I'll tell Lisa the truth. She'll understand. We can say I'm at a leadership retreat or something if anyone asks. As the meeting wrapped up, Charles could sense the apprehension from his two top executives. I know this is unorthodox, he said, but I need you both to trust me on this. Something's wrong with our company culture, and I need to see it for myself if we're going to fix it. Marcus nodded slowly. We've got your back, Charles. Just be careful out there. With the plan in motion, the next week flew by in a flurry of preparation. Charles worked with a professional makeup artist to perfect his Charlie look. He practiced walking differently, speaking with a slight accent, anything to throw off anyone who might recognize him. The night before his first day on the job, Charles stood in front of his bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the man staring back at him. Gone was the polished CEO in designer suits. In his place stood Charlie, the janitor, in a worn uniform and scuffed work boots. Lisa appeared in the doorway, a mix of concern and amusement on her face. I still think you're crazy for doing this, she said, wrapping her arms around him from behind. Charles met her eyes in the mirror. Maybe I am, but I need to do this, Lisa. For the company, for our employees, for myself. She kissed him on the cheek. Just promise me you'll be careful. And don't forget to eat the lunch I packed you. Charles chuckled, turning to embrace his wife properly. Yes, dear. I'll be the best-fed janitor in Silicon Valley. As he lay in bed that night, sleep eluded Charles. His mind raced with possibilities. What would he discover? How would people treat him? Would this crazy scheme actually work? Finally, as the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, Charles gave up on sleep. He quietly got dressed in his janitor's uniform, careful not to wake Lisa. He left a note on the kitchen counter, reminding her how much he loved her and appreciating her support. The drive to Tech Vision's headquarters felt surreal. Charles had made this trip thousands of times, but never like this. He parked in the far corner of the employee lot, away from his usual reserved space. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and shouldered the worn backpack that completed his disguise. As he walked toward the employee entrance, not the executive one he usually used, Charles felt a mix of nervousness and excitement unlike anything he'd experienced in years. He approached the security desk, heart pounding. This was it, the first test of his disguise. Good morning, the guard said, barely looking up from his computer. ID badge, please. Charles fumbled with the temporary badge Jessica had arranged for him. Yeah, here you go. It's my first day, actually. The guard glanced at the badge, then at Charles, before waving him through. Welcome aboard. Janitorial office is on the basement level. Take the elevator on your left. As the elevator doors closed behind him, Charles let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Step 1, complete. He was in. The basement level was a world away from the sleek, modern offices above. Harsh fluorescent lights illuminated a maze of storage rooms and maintenance areas. Charles followed the signs to the janitorial office, where he was greeted by a gruff, middle-aged woman named Doris. You must be the new guy, she said, looking him up and down. Charlie, right? Charles nodded, trying to remember the backstory they'd created. That's me. Thanks for having me. Doris snorted. Don't thank me yet. You might not last the week. Follow me. I'll show you the ropes. As Doris led him through a crash course in cleaning protocols and safety procedures, Charles tried to take in every detail. He noticed the worn-out equipment, the lingering smell of harsh chemicals, the way Doris winced when she bent over to lift a heavy bucket. Any questions? Doris asked as she finished her orientation. Charles hesitated, then decided to take a risk. Yeah, actually, what's it like working here? At TechVision, I mean, Doris's expression softened slightly. It's a job, she shrugged. Pays decent, better than most places. But don't expect anyone up there to notice you exist, she said, pointing to the ceiling. To them, we're invisible. Just keep your head down, do your work, and try not to get in anyone's way. Charles felt a pang of guilt. Had he created a company where hard-working people felt invisible? Before he could dwell on it further, Doris handed him a mop and bucket. All right, Charlie, let's see what you're made of. Start with the lobby, then work your way up. I'll check on you later. With that, Charles found himself alone, pushing a janitor's cart towards the gleaming lobby of the company he had built from the ground up. As he watched the early morning employees stream in, barely glancing in his direction, a realization hit him. For the first time in decades, Charles Benson was truly invisible in his own company, and he had never felt more exposed. As he dipped his mop into the bucket for the first time, Charles took a deep breath. This was it. No turning back now. Whatever he discovered over the next week, good or bad, would shape the future of TechVision. With a mix of determination and trepidation, Charles, now fully in character as Charlie the janitor, began to clean. As he worked, he kept his ears open and his eyes peeled, ready to uncover the hidden truths of the company he thought he knew so well. Little did he know, the week ahead would challenge everything he believed about his company, his employees, and even himself. The journey of discovery was just beginning, and Charles Benson was about to learn that sometimes the view from the bottom can change everything. As the morning rush of employees began to taper off, Charles found himself alone in the gleaming lobby of TechVision. The mop in his hands felt foreign, a stark reminder of the unusual situation he had placed himself in. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the day ahead. "Excuse me," a voice called out, startling Charles from his thoughts. He turned to see a young woman in a crisp blazer, tapping her foot impatiently. "There's a spill by the elevator. Can you take care of that?" Charles nodded, grateful for the simple task. "Of course, right away," he replied, careful to maintain his Charlie persona. As he made his way to the elevator, Charles couldn't help but notice how the woman's eyes had barely met his. It was as if he were part of the building's fixtures, necessary, but not worthy of real acknowledgement. Throughout the morning, Charles found himself invisible in a way he had never experienced before. Employees rushed past him, engrossed in conversations or glued to their phones. A few offered polite nods or mumbled thank yous as he held doors open or moved his cart out of the way, but most seemed to look right through him. By lunchtime, Charles had made his way to the bustling cafeteria. As he wiped down tables and emptied trash bins, he overheard snippets of conversations that painted a picture of the company he thought he knew so well. "Did you hear about the new project in R&D?" One excited voice whispered. "I heard they're only pulling people from the top-tier universities for the team." "No surprise there," another voice replied with a hint of bitterness. "It's all about who you know and where you came from around here." Charles frowned, pausing in his work. He had always prided himself on TechVision's meritocratic approach. Had he been blind to an undercurrent of elitism? As he moved through the cafeteria, Charles's attention was drawn to a table of familiar faces, his management team. He kept his head down, focusing on his cleaning while straining to hear their conversation. "I swear, if I have to deal with one more complaint from the customer service team, I'm going to lose it," a voice Charles recognized as belonging to Linda, his head of operations, said with exasperation. "They're like children, always whining about something." Charles felt a pang of disappointment. He had always thought Linda to be one of his most empathetic leaders. "Tell me about it," another voice chimed in, Mark from marketing. "I had to shoot down another innovative idea from one of the junior analysts yesterday. These kids think they can waltz in with their fancy degrees and change everything overnight." The table erupted in laughter, and Charles felt his face grow hot with a mix of embarrassment and anger. Was this how his leadership team really felt about their employees? As the afternoon wore on, Charles found himself on one of the engineering floors, meticulously cleaning workstations and conference rooms. He couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between different areas of the office. In one section, a group of young employees worked in a collaborative, energetic atmosphere. Their desks were adorned with the latest tech gadgets, and they seemed to have easy access to senior team members. Just a few rows over, however, the mood was noticeably different. Here, employees seemed more subdued, hunched over older equipment, and separated from the livelier group by an invisible but palpable barrier. As the day began to wind down, Charles found himself back on the executive floor, cleaning the plush corner offices he was more accustomed to occupying than maintaining. He took extra care here, knowing that even the slightest oversight could blow his cover. While dusting a bookshelf in one of the conference rooms, Charles overheard a heated conversation from the adjacent office. The door was slightly ajar, and he recognized Linda's voice immediately. "I don't care if she's been here for 10 years, Linda was saying, her tone sharp. "Sarah doesn't have the right image for the client-facing role. We need someone more polished, more charismatic." "But her performance reviews have been stellar," another voice countered. "She knows the product inside and out." Linda scoffed. "Performance isn't everything, David. We need someone who fits the TechVision brand." "What about that new guy, Chris? He's got the look, and he's great at networking." "Chris has only been here for 6 months, David protested. "He barely knows the basics of our platform." "So he'll learn," Linda dismissed. "The important thing is that he'll make a good impression. That's what matters in this business." Charles felt his stomach churn. He had always trusted Linda's judgment in personnel matters, believing her to have the company's best interests at heart. But this conversation revealed a side of her he had never seen, one that prioritized superficial qualities over experience and hard work. Lost in his troubled thoughts, Charles didn't notice Linda emerging from her office until it was too late. He turned, coming face to face with her, and felt a moment of panic. Would she recognize him? But Linda's eyes swept over him with cool disinterest. "Excuse me," she said, her tone making it clear that she expected him to move out of her way immediately. "Sorry, mam charas mambled, stepin aside." But in his haste, he accidentally knocked over his cleaning cart, sending supplies scattering across the floor. Linda's expression morphed from annoyance to outright disdain. "For heaven's sake," she snapped. "Can't you be more careful? Some of us have important work to do here." Charles felt a flash of anger, but he swallowed it down. "I'm very sorry," he said, dropping to his knees to gather the fallen items. "It won't happen again." Linda stood over him, making no move to help. "See that it doesn't. We can't have clumsy janitors disrupting our work. If you can't handle the job, I'm sure we can find someone who can." With that, she strode away, leaving Charles kneeling on the floor, surrounded by scattered cleaning supplies. He stared after her, shocked by the interaction. This was the same Linda who had always presented herself as a champion of workplace respect and dignity. The same Linda who had given impassioned speeches about the value of every employee, regardless of their role. As he slowly picked up his supplies, Charles felt a complex mix of emotions washing over him. Disappointment in Linda, certainly, but also a growing sense of unease about his own role in shaping the company culture. Had he been so removed from the day-to-day realities of TechVision that he had allowed this kind of behavior to flourish unchecked? The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Charles went through the motions of his janitorial duties, his mind racing with everything he had seen and heard throughout the day. As he clocked out and headed to his car, parked far from his usual spot, he felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. Driving home, Charles reflected on the day's events. He had expected to gain some new insights into his company, but nothing had prepared him for the reality he had encountered. The casual dismissal of lower-level employees, the blatant favoritism, the gap between the company's stated values and the actual behavior of its leaders. It all painted a troubling picture. As he pulled into his driveway, Charles realized that this undercover mission was going to be far more challenging and potentially more transformative than he had ever imagined. He had seen TechVision through new eyes today, and the view was far from flattering. As Charles entered TechVision the next day, the weight of his discoveries hung heavy on his shoulders. The gleaming lobby, once a source of pride, now seemed to mock him with its superficial shine. But as he pushed his cleaning cart towards the elevators, Charles reminded himself that his mission wasn't over. There had to be more to the story of his company. His first stop of the day was the IT department, a maze of cubicles bathed in the blue glow of multiple monitors. As Charles began his cleaning routine, he couldn't help but notice one particular employee who stood out from the rest. This man, probably in his mid-30s, moved from desk to desk, offering help to his colleagues with a genuine smile. Curious, Charles deliberately knocked over a stack of paper near the man's desk. "Oh, let me help you with that," the man said immediately, crouching down to assist Charles in gathering the scattered sheets. "Thanks," Charles mumbled, maintaining his janitor persona. "Most folks don't even notice me." The man looked up, his kind eyes meeting Charles's. "I'm Henry," he said, extending his hand. "And everyone deserves to be noticed, no matter what job they do." Over the next hour, Charles observed Henry closely. He watched as Henry patiently explained complex technical issues to frustrated colleagues, never once losing his cool. When a new intern struggled with setting up her workstation, Henry was the first to offer assistance, walking her through the process step by step. But what truly impressed Charles was how Henry interacted with the other support staff. He knew the names of every security guard and cafeteria worker. When the mail clerk came by with a heavy package, Henry immediately stood up to help him carry it. "You're always so nice to everyone, Henry," a coworker commented. "How do you do it?" Henry shrugged, a modest smile on his face. "We're all in this together, aren't we? A little kindness goes a long way." As Charles moved on to clean other areas, he felt a glimmer of hope. People like Henry were the heart and soul of what Tech Vision was supposed to be. If only this spirit of kindness and collaboration could spread throughout the company. Later that evening, Charles prepared for his first night shift. The bustling office had transformed into a quiet, dimly lit space. Most employees had gone home, leaving behind empty desks and screensavers flickering in the darkness. As he made his way through the finance department, Charles noticed a lone figure hunched over a computer, the blue light of the screen illuminating her tired face. He recognized her as Angela, one of the senior accountants. Pretending to empty nearby trash bins, Charles overheard Angela muttering to herself as she pored over spreadsheets. "These numbers can't be right," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "If we don't catch this discrepancy now, it could cause huge problems down the line." Charles watched as Angela dialed a number on her phone. "Hi, Mrs. Johnson. I'm so sorry to call so late." "Yes, it's Angela from Tech Vision. I know Tommy has a big game tomorrow, but I really need those files." "Oh, you can? Thank you so much. I promise I'll make it up to you." As she hung up, Angela let out a heavy sigh. Charles could see the conflict on her face, the dedication to her work warring with the guilt of missing another of her son's events. Over the next few hours, Charles observed Angela's tireless work ethic. She meticulously combed through financial reports, caught errors that could have cost the company millions, and even took the time to leave detailed notes for her team to follow up on in the morning. Around midnight, Angela finally started packing up her things. As she did, Charles overheard her phone conversation with what seemed to be her son. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Mommy has to work late again. I promise I'll be there for your next game." "Yes, I left dinner in the fridge. Don't forget to brush your teeth." "Okay. I love you." The pain in Angela's voice was palpable. As she gathered her things, Charles decided to take a risk. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, approaching her desk. "I couldn't help but notice you've been working really late. Is everything okay?" Angela looked up, surprised to see someone else still in the office. For a moment, Charles feared she might dismiss him, but instead, her shoulders sagged with exhaustion. "Oh, it's just part of the job," she said with a wan smile. "There's always more work to be done, and someone has to do it. But surely your hard work is recognized?" Charles pressed gently. Angela's laugh was tinged with bitterness. "Recognized? Hardly. I've been passed over for promotion 3 times now. Apparently, I'm not a team player because I can't make it to all the after-work drinks and team-building exercises. Never mind that I'm here every night making sure our numbers are accurate." As Angela left, Charles felt a mix of admiration for her dedication and anger at the system that failed to recognize it. He made a mental note to look into Angela's situation more closely once his undercover stint was over. The next day, Charles found himself on one of the product development floors. The atmosphere here was markedly different from other departments, more casual, with open workspaces and whiteboards covered in complex diagrams. As he cleaned around a group of designers huddled around a computer, Charles overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. "I'm telling you, Raj's accent is killing our presentations," one young designer said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Clients can barely understand him." "Yeah," another chimed in. "And have you seen the way he dresses? So old-fashioned. He's making our whole team look bad." Charles glanced over at Raj, an older Indian man sitting alone at his desk, seemingly oblivious to the cruel words being spoken about him. But as Charles watched, he noticed the slight slump in Raj's shoulders, the way his eyes darted nervously around the room. It was clear that Raj was all too aware of his co-workers' opinions. Later, in the break room, Charles witnessed another disturbing incident. A group of younger employees were gathered around the coffee machine, laughing and chatting. As an older woman approached, their demeanor changed. "Oh, here comes Dinosaur Donna," one of them snickered. "Better watch out. She might mistake the coffee machine for a fax." The woman, Donna, heard the comment. Her face flushed with embarrassment, but she held her head high as she poured her coffee and quickly left the room. Charles felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just casual office banter. It was targeted, cruel behavior that had no place in any workplace, let alone the company he had built. As the day wore on, Charles found himself in a conference room, cleaning up after a management meeting. He overheard two middle managers discussing an upcoming project. "So, who are we putting on the team for this one?" the first asked. The second manager shrugged. "The usual suspects, I guess. You know, the ones who fit the TechVision image. What about Sarah from engineering? I heard she had some great ideas for this." "Sarah? Come on. She's not exactly leadership material, is she? Too quiet, doesn't really put herself out there. We need people with presence, you know?" Charles felt his heart sink. This casual dismissal of talent in favor of an arbitrary image was everything he had hoped TechVision would never become. As he finished his shift and headed home, Charles's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The kindness and dedication of employees like Henry and Angela gave him hope. But the pervasive culture of favoritism, the casual cruelty towards those who didn't fit a certain mold, and the systemic overlooking of true talent and hard work, it all pointed to a deep-rooted problem. Sitting in his car in the TechVision parking lot, Charles pulled out a notebook and began to jot down his observations. As he wrote, a pattern began to emerge. The issues he had witnessed weren't isolated incidents. They weren't the actions of a few bad apples. They were symptoms of a larger, more insidious problem. TechVision's culture, which he had always believed to be inclusive and merit-based, had somehow warped into something unrecognizable. Somewhere along the line, as the company grew and flourished, its core values had been lost in translation. The problem, Charles realized with a sinking feeling, started with middle management. The very people he had trusted to uphold TechVision's values and nurture talent at all levels were instead perpetuating a culture of exclusion and narrow-minded thinking. Linda's dismissive attitude towards lower-level employees, the sales team's ruthless pursuit of numbers at the expense of customer relationships, the casual bullying of those who didn't fit a certain mold, it all stemmed from a fundamental misunderstanding of what TechVision was supposed to stand for. As he drove home, Charles's mind raced with questions. How had this happened under his watch? Had he become so removed from the day-to-day operations of the company that he had failed to notice this cultural shift? And most importantly, how could he fix it? Arriving home, Charles found his wife Lisa waiting for him, concern etched on her face. "Another rough day?" she asked, taking in his troubled expression. Charles nodded, sinking into a chair. "Lisa, I think I've made a terrible mistake," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "What do you mean?" Lisa asked, sitting beside him. Charles looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of determination and regret. "I've let TechVision become something I never intended. The culture, the values we started with, they've all been twisted into something I barely recognize." Lisa placed a comforting hand on his arm. "But you're seeing it now. she said gently. That's the first step to making it right. Charles nodded slowly. You're right, but it's not going to be easy. This isn't just about a few policy changes or team-building exercises. We need to rebuild TechVision's culture from the ground up. As he spoke, Charles felt a renewed sense of purpose flooding through him. Yes, the problems ran deep. Yes, the road ahead would be challenging. But he had built TechVision once, guided by a vision of what a truly great tech company could be. He could do it again. I need to extend my undercover stint, Charles said, more to himself than to Lisa. There's more to learn, more to understand. And then, Lisa prompted. Charles met her gaze, his eyes blazing with determination. And then we change everything. We make TechVision what it always should have been, a place where talent is nurtured, where hard work is recognized, where kindness and collaboration are valued above all else. Lisa smiled, squeezing his hand. That's the Charles Benson I know, she said. The visionary who's never afraid to do what's right, no matter how difficult. As Charles settled in for the night, his mind was already racing with plans. He would continue his undercover work, digging deeper into the root causes of TechVision's cultural issues. He would seek out more employees like Henry and Angela, understanding what drove them to embody the best of what the company could be. The next day, as the first light of dawn crept through his bedroom window, Charles awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. He donned his janitor's uniform, no longer feeling like a CEO in disguise, but like a man on a mission. Today, he would dive even deeper into the heart of TechVision, seeking out the hidden dynamics and unspoken truths that shaped the company's culture. Arriving at the office earlier than usual, Charles made his way to the customer support floor. Here, in the pre-dawn quiet, he found a small group of employees already at their desks, headsets on, dealing with overnight inquiries from global clients. Among them was Angela, the dedicated accountant he had observed earlier. She looked exhausted, her eyes ringed with dark circles, but her voice was patient and kind as she walked a client through a complex billing issue. As Charles cleaned nearby, careful not to disturb the working employees, he overheard a conversation between Angela and a younger colleague. Angela, you're here early again, the young man said, concern evident in his voice. Didn't you just finish a late shift last night? Angela smiled wearily. You know how it is, Jake. The work doesn't do itself. Besides, I need to show that I'm committed if I want any chance at that promotion. Jake frowned. But you're already the most dedicated person here. Surely they see that? Angela's laugh was tinged with bitterness. Sometimes I wonder if anyone sees us at all. But hey, that's life in the big leagues, right? We keep the company running, even if no one knows our names. Charles felt a pang of guilt. He had always prided himself on knowing his employees, on fostering a culture where everyone felt seen and valued. But Angela's words painted a very different picture. Later, in the product development area, Charles observed a team meeting where ideas were being pitched for a new feature. He noticed one young woman, her body language screaming discomfort, trying repeatedly to speak up. Each time, she was talked over by louder, more assertive team members. Finally, in a moment of frustration, she blurted out, "What if we approached it from a different angle? Instead of focusing on speed, we could prioritize accessibility for users with disabilities." The room fell silent for a moment before the team lead spoke. That's actually a really interesting idea, May. Why didn't you say something earlier? May's face flushit. I've been trying to, but dash. Well, speak up next time. The lead cut her off. We can't read minds here. Charles watched as May shrunk back into her chair, the momentary recognition of her idea overshadowed by the implicit criticism. He made a mental note to look into team dynamics and how they might be stifling diverse voices and ideas. As the day wore on, Charles found himself back in the IT department, where he had first met Henry. Today, Henry was engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with his supervisor. "I'm telling you, this new system is full of security holes," Henry was saying, his usually calm demeanor replaced by urgency. "If we rush to implement it, we're putting our clients' data at risk." The supervisor, a man Charles recognized as one of the rising stars in middle management, waved his hand dismissively. "Henry, we've been over this. The board wants this system implemented by the end of the quarter." We don't have time for your paranoid security checks. But Enough, the supervisor cut him off. You're a great tech, Henry, but you need to learn to see the bigger picture. Sometimes we have to take calculated risks to stay competitive. Now, are you going to be a team player on this? Or do I need to find someone else who will? Charles watched as Henry's face fell. It was clear that this wasn't the first time his concerns had been dismissed. As Henry returned to his desk, Charles could see the conflict written across his face. The battle between his professional integrity and the pressure to conform. By the end of his shift, Charles felt emotionally drained. The weight of everything he had observed over the past few days pressed down on him. The casual cruelty, the dismissal of valuable input, the prioritization of short-term gains over long-term integrity. It all painted a picture of a company culture that had lost its way. As he changed out of his janitor's uniform in a small maintenance closet, Charles caught sight of himself in a dusty mirror. The man staring back at him wasn't just a CEO in disguise. He was a leader who has great responsibilities on his shoulder, now more than ever. As Charles entered Tech Vision for another day of his undercover mission, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. The weight of his discoveries over the past few days hung heavy on his shoulders, each step reminding him of the disconnect between the company he thought he had built and the reality he was now witnessing. The morning started quietly enough. Charles made his rounds, pushing his cleaning cart through the maze of cubicles and corner offices. He nodded politely to the early arrivals, most of whom barely registered his presence. It was a stark reminder of how invisible the support staff often were in the daily operations of the company. As he approached the executive floor, Charles steeled himself. This area had been a hotbed of revelations, and he had a feeling today would be no different. He was right, but not in the way he expected. Just as he began to clean the glass walls of a conference room, he heard the unmistakable click of high heels approaching. Linda, the head of operations, rounded the corner, engrossed in conversation with two other executives. "I'm telling you," Linda was saying, her voice sharp with frustration, "if we don't meet these targets, heads will roll. I don't care how we do it, but it needs to happen." One of the other executives, a man Charles recognized as the head of marketing, spoke up hesitantly. "Linda, I understand the pressure, but some of these goals seem unrealistic. Our teams are already stretched thin." Linda cut him off with a dismissive wave. "That's not my problem. If your teams can't handle it, maybe we need to find people who can. This is the big leagues, gentlemen. There's no room for weakness." Charles felt his heart sink. This was the Linda he had come to know over the past few days, cold, ruthless, and entirely focused on results at the expense of employee well-being. It was a far cry from the compassionate leader he thought he had promoted. Lost in these thoughts, Charles didn't realize he had stopped cleaning. The squeak of his cloth against the glass caught Linda's attention. "You there, janitor," she snapped, turning to face him. "What do you think you're doing?" Charles straightened up, trying to maintain his Charlie persona. "Just cleaning the windows, ma'am," he said quietly. Linda's eyes narrowed. "Well, you're doing a terrible job. Look at these streaks." She ran a manicured finger across the glass, her lip curling in disgust. "Is this really the best you can do?" Charles felt a flicker of anger, quickly suppressed. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'll do better." But Linda wasn't finished. She turned to her colleagues, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "You see, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Mediocrity. People who are satisfied with doing the bare minimum. It's everywhere in this company, from the bottom." She gestured dismissively at Charles, "all the way up." The other executives shifted uncomfortably, clearly embarrassed by Linda's behavior, but unwilling to challenge her. Charles took a deep breath, fighting to keep his composure. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I assure you, I always try to do my best work." Linda laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Your best? Well, if this is your best, maybe you should consider a different line of work. One that doesn't require skills." The contempt in her voice was palpable. Charles felt a surge of emotions: anger at Linda's cruelty, disappointment in what she had become, and a deep sadness for the culture that allowed such behavior to flourish. For a moment, he was tempted to reveal himself, to put Linda in her place and show her just how wrong she was. But he held back, knowing that this moment, painful as it was was providing valuable insight into the true nature of his company's culture. Instead, he simply nodded, keeping his eyes downcast. "I'll try harder, ma'am. Thank you for your feedback." Linda seemed almost disappointed by his lack of reaction. With a final scoff, she turned on her heel and strode away, her colleagues trailing behind her like chastened schoolchildren. As their footsteps faded, Charles leaned heavily against his cleaning cart, his mind reeling. He had known things were bad, but to witness such blatant disrespect and cruelty firsthand, it was almost more than he could bear. A gentle touch on his arm startled him out of his thoughts. He looked up to see Henry, the kind-hearted IT worker, standing beside him with a look of concern. "Hey, don't let her get to you," Henry said softly. "Linda, she's been like that with everyone lately. It's not personal." Charles managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Henry. I guess I'm not used to being spoken to like that." Henry's expression darkened. "Nobody should be used to it. It's not right." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Things didn't used to be like this, you know? This company, it used to stand for something. Now, sometimes I wonder if anybody remembers what that was." As Henry walked away, Charles felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had witnessed the worst of TechVision's culture, but he had also seen the best in people like Henry. There was still hope, still a foundation to build upon. Little did Charles know, the day's revelations were far from over. As the afternoon wore on, Charles found himself in the accounting department, emptying trash bins and wiping down desks. The floor was quieter than usual, with many employees out for a company-wide training session. As he approached a cluster of cubicles, he heard a muffled sound. Someone crying. Concerned, Charles rounded the corner to find a man hunched over his desk, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Charles hesitated, unsure of how to proceed, but his innate compassion won out over his need to maintain his cover. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Are you all right?" The man looked up, hastily wiping his eyes. Charles recognized him as Terrence, a longtime employee who had been with the company almost since its inception. "I'm fine," Terrence said quickly, trying to compose himself. "Just allergies, you know." Charles nodded, pretending to accept the obvious lie. "Of course. Can I get you some tissues or water or something?" Terrence shook his head, but then seemed to deflate. "Actually, would you mind sitting for a minute? I know you're probably busy, but I could use someone to talk to." Without hesitation, Charles pulled up a chair. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Terrence was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been with this company for over a decade. Gave it everything I had. Missed my kids' birthdays, worked weekends, holidays. And now..." He trailed off, his voice choked with emotion. Charles waited patiently, his heart already aching for what he suspected was coming. "I'm about to lose my house," Terrence finally said, the words coming out in a rush. "My wife's been sick, medical bills piling up. I asked for a raise, or even just some extra hours, but they said there was nothing they could do. After all these years, all that loyalty, and this is what I get." Charles felt a wave of shame and anger wash over him. How had he allowed this to happen? How had he become so disconnected from the lives of the people who had helped build TechVision? "Have you talked to HR?" Charles asked, already knowing the answer. Terrence laughed bitterly. "Oh, I tried. They gave me some pamphlets about financial planning and told me to hang in there. As if that's going to stop the bank from foreclosing." Charles's mind raced. He wanted nothing more than to reveal himself, to tell Terrence that everything would be okay, that he would make this right. But he knew that a hasty reaction now could jeopardize the larger changes that needed to happen. Instead, he placed a comforting hand on Terrence's shoulder. "I'm so sorry you're going through this. It's not right. Not after everything you've given to this company." Terrence looked up, surprise and gratitude in his eyes. "Thanks. You know, you're the first person here who's actually listened. Everyone else, it's like they don't even see us anymore. We're just cogs in the machine." As Charles left Terrence's cubicle, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The disconnect between the company's soaring profits and the struggles of its most loyal employees was staggering. How had he allowed this to happen under his watch? The rest of the day passed in a blur. Charles went through the motions of his janitorial duties, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about Linda's cruelty, Terrence's despair, and all the other instances of injustice and indifference he had witnessed over the past few days. As he clocked out and headed to his car, Charles felt the weight of his discoveries pressing down on him. The drive home was a haze of conflicting thoughts and emotions. By the time he pulled into his driveway, he knew sleep would not come easily tonight. As the night deepened, Charles found himself unable to sleep. He paced the length of their bedroom, his mind racing with everything he had seen and heard over the past few days. The good, Henry's unwavering kindness, Angela's quiet dedication, the flashes of innovation and passion he had witnessed in various departments. The bad, the casual dismissal of experienced employees, the focus on short-term gains over long-term stability, the growing gap between upper management and the rank-and-file workers. The ugly, Linda's cruel outburst, Terrence's desperate situation, the pervasive culture of fear and favoritism that seemed to touch every corner of the company. As he stared out the window at the quiet street below, Charles grappled with the enormity of the task ahead. It wasn't just about making a few changes or firing a few bad apples. The problems ran deep, woven into the very fabric of the company culture he had unknowingly allowed to develop. What had happened to that spirit? How had they strayed so far from those early ideals? As the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, Charles came to a decision. He couldn't continue this charade any longer. It was time to reveal what he had discovered, to confront the hard truths head-on. The morning sun cast long shadows across the TechVision campus as employees filed into the main auditorium. Whispers and confused glances bounced between colleagues, all wondering about the sudden company-wide meeting called by CEO Charles Benson. As the last few stragglers found their seats, the lights dimmed, and Charles stepped onto the stage. His crisp suit and polished demeanor were a stark contrast to the janitor's uniform he had worn for the past week. He surveyed the crowd, his eyes lingering on familiar faces he had encountered during his undercover stint. "Good morning, everyone," Charles began, his voice steady but tinged with an emotion few had ever heard from their usually composed CEO. "I've called you here today because we need to have an important conversation about the future of TechVision." A hushed murmur rippled through the audience. Charles raised his hand, silencing the crowd. "But before we look to the future, I want to share some stories about the present, about the incredible people who make up the heart and soul of this company." Charles smiled warmly, his gaze finding Henry in the crowd. "I want to talk about Henry from IT. Henry, could you stand up for a moment?" Surprised, Henry slowly rose to his feet, his face flushing with embarrassment. "Henry here is the kind of employee every company dreams of having," Charles continued. "His technical skills are matched only by his kindness and willingness to help others. I've seen him stay late to assist colleagues, patiently explain complex concepts to interns, and even help the cleaning staff with heavy lifting." Henry's colleagues patted him on the back, many nodding in agreement. Charles then turned his attention to another section of the auditorium. "And then there's Angela from accounting. Angela, please stand." Angela stood hesitantly, confusion etched on her tired face. "Angela's dedication to this company is truly remarkable," Charles said, his voice full of admiration. "She works tirelessly to ensure our numbers are accurate, often sacrificing her personal time to double-check reports and catch discrepancies that could cost us millions. Her attention to detail and unwavering work ethic are invaluable assets to TechVision." As Angela sat down, visibly moved by the recognition, Charles's expression grew more serious. "These are just two examples of the incredible talent and dedication we have within our ranks. But I fear that too often, their efforts go unnoticed or unappreciated. And that, my friends, is a failure of leadership, my failure." A tense silence fell over the auditorium. Charles took a deep breath before continuing. "Over the past week, I've had the unique opportunity to see our company from a different perspective. You see, I wasn't in Aspen at a leadership retreat, as many of you were told. I was here, among you, disguised as a member of our janitorial staff." Gasps and murmurs of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Charles held up a photo of himself in the janitor's uniform, and recognition dawned on many faces. I became Charlie, the new janitor, to understand the true state of our company culture. And what I discovered both inspired and deeply troubled me. Charles's gaze swept across the room, lingering on Linda and other members of the management team. I witnessed acts of kindness and dedication that made me proud. But I also saw behavior that goes against everything TechVision should stand for. I saw talented employees being overlooked because they didn't fit a certain image. I saw experienced workers dismissed as outdated or irrelevant. I saw a culture of fear and favoritism that stifles innovation and crushes morale. He paused, letting his words sink in. The auditorium was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. "Linda," Charles said, his voice firm but not unkind, "would you please join me on stage?" Linda stood slowly, her face a mask of confusion and growing dread. As she made her way to the stage, Charles continued, "Linda has been with us for many years and has played a crucial role in our growth. But during my time as Charlie, I witnessed behavior from Linda that deeply concerned me." Linda reached the stage, her composure slipping as she realized the implications of Charles's words. "Linda, do you remember your interaction with the janitor a few days ago? The one you berated for leaving streaks on a window?" Color drained from Linda's face as recognition dawned. That was you," she stammered. Charles nodded solemnly. "It was." And while that moment was personally humiliating, what truly saddened me was the realization that this wasn't an isolated incident. This was a reflection of a leadership style that has become all too common at TechVision. He turned back to the audience. "I want to be clear. This isn't about singling out individuals for punishment. This is about acknowledging that we have collectively lost our way. We've prioritized short-term gains over long-term sustainability. We've allowed a culture of fear and favoritism to take root. And in doing so, we've betrayed the very values that made TechVision great in the first place." Charles's voice softened as he addressed Linda directly. "Linda, I remember when you first joined TechVision. Your passion for innovation and your dedication to mentoring young talent were inspiring. Somewhere along the way, we let the pressures of growth and competition change us. But I believe that person is still in there, and I hope you'll join me in rebuilding the culture we once had." Linda nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I am sorry, Charles. To you, to everyone. I don't know when I became this person, but I want to change." Charles squeezed her shoulder supportively before turning back to the audience. "Change starts today, and it starts with all of us." Effective immediately, we're implementing several new policies and initiatives. He began listing off the changes. First, we're establishing an anonymous reporting system for any workplace concerns. No one should ever fear retaliation for speaking up about unethical behavior or unfair treatment. A ripple of approval went through the crowd. Second, we're overhauling our performance review and promotion processes. Merit, dedication, and innovation will be the primary factors in advancement, not who you know or how well you play office politics. Charles's gaze found Terrence in the audience. Third, we're conducting a comprehensive review of our compensation and benefits packages. No loyal TechVision employee should ever have to choose between their job and their family's well-being. Terrence's eyes widened in surprise and hope. Fourth, we're implementing mandatory leadership training for all managers, focusing on empathy, inclusivity, and ethical decision-making. We need to relearn how to lead with compassion and integrity. Charles paused, allowing the weight of these announcements to sink in. But policies alone aren't enough. We need a fundamental shift in how we treat each other, how we value each other's contributions, and how we define success. He stepped forward, his voice filled with passion. "I started TechVision with a vision of creating not just innovative products, but a workplace where people could thrive, where ideas could flourish regardless of where they came from. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that vision. Today, we start the journey back." Charles looked out at the sea of faces before him, some shocked, some moved, all attentive. "I know this is a lot to process. You may be feeling angry, betrayed, or skeptical about whether real change is possible. Those feelings are valid. Trust has been broken, and it will take time to rebuild. He took a deep breath before continuing. But I'm asking you to take this journey with me, to recommit to the values that brought us together in the first place, to hold me and each other accountable. Together, we can make TechVision not just a leader in innovation, but a model for what a truly great company can be. The auditorium was silent for a moment before a slow clap started. It was Henry, standing up with tears in his eyes. Soon, others joined in, the applause growing until it filled the room. As the applause died down, Charles raised his hands. Thank you. Now, I know you all have questions and concerns. That's why for the rest of the day, I'll be holding open forums in smaller groups. I want to hear from every one of you, your experiences, your ideas, your hopes for the future of TechVision. He gestured to the doors. Department heads will be organizing these sessions shortly. But before we break, I want to say one more thing. Charles's voice softened, filled with genuine emotion. To those of you I interacted with as Charlie, whether you showed kindness or indifference, whether you saw me or looked right through me, thank you. You've taught me more about this company and about myself than I ever could have learned from behind a desk. Now let's get to work on building the TechVision we all believe in. As the employees filed out, the buzz of conversation filling the air, Charles stepped off the stage. He was immediately surrounded by a mix of executives, HR representatives, and employees, all eager to speak with him. But Charles's eyes sought out specific faces in the crowd. He made his way to Terrence, placing a hand on his shoulder. Terrence, I'd like to speak with you privately about your situation. We're going to make this right. Terrence nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. Next, Charles found Angela. Your dedication hasn't gone unnoticed, Angela. I'd like to discuss a promotion that's long overdue. Angela's eyes widened in surprise and gratitude. Finally, Charles approached Henry. Thank you for reminding me what TechVision is supposed to stand for. I'd like you to be part of a special task force to help implement these changes. Henry smiled broadly. I'd be honored, sir. As the day progressed, Charles moved from one small group session to another, listening intently to employees at all levels. The conversations were sometimes heated, often emotional, but always productive. People who had never felt heard before were finally given a voice, and those who had abused their power were held accountable. By the time the sun set on TechVision that day, there was a palpable sense of change in the air. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, there was a shared sense of purpose and hope. As Charles finally made his way to his car, exhausted but exhilarated, he found Lisa waiting for him. How did it go? She asked, concern and pride mingling in her voice. Charles smiled, a weight lifted from his shoulders. It's just the beginning, he said, but I think we've taken the first step towards becoming the company we always should have been. Lisa squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you, Charlie, she said with a wink. Charles laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. As they drove home, he knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for the first time in a long time, he was excited to face them, not as a CEO behind a desk, but as a leader committed to building a truly great company, one day at a time. In the weeks following Charles's dramatic revelation, TechVision buzzed with a newfound energy. The once stifling atmosphere of fear and favoritism began to give way to a culture of openness and collaboration. As Charles walked through the office on a bright Monday morning, he couldn't help but smile at the tangible changes he witnessed. His first stop was Linda's office, or rather, her former office. The space now belonged to Angela, who looked up from her computer with a mix of excitement and nervousness as Charles entered. How's the new role treating you, Angela? Charles asked warmly. Angela's face lit up. It's challenging, but in the best way possible. I never thought I'd have this opportunity, Charles. Thank you for believing in me. Charles nodded, genuinely pleased. You've earned it. Your dedication and attention to detail are exactly what we need in this position. How are your teammates adjusting? There was some initial skepticism, Angela admitted. But I think they're starting to see that I'm here to support them, not just push for results at any cost. As they chatted, Charles couldn't help but reflect on the stark contrast between Angela's leadership style and Linda's. Where Linda had ruled through fear and intimidation, Angela led with empathy and collaboration. Leaving Angela's office, Charles made his way to the IT department. He found Henry surrounded by a group of interns, patiently explaining a complex coding concept. As the group dispersed, Henry looked up and grinned. "Mr. Benson, or should I say, Charlie?" Henry joked, his eyes twinkling. Charles laughed, the sound echoing through the department. "Charles is fine, Henry. How's the new task force coming along?" Henry's expression turned serious. "It's eye-opening, sir. We're uncovering issues we never knew existed, but also finding incredible ideas from employees at all levels. People are finally feeling heard." As they discussed the task force's progress, Charles noticed a familiar face hovering nearby. It was Terrence, looking healthier and more relaxed than Charles had ever seen him. "Terrence, join us," Charles called out. Terrence approached, a smile brightening his features. "I just wanted to thank you again, Charles," Terrence said, his voice thick with emotion. "The assistance program you set up, it saved my home, my family's future." Charles placed a hand on Terrence's shoulder. "You've given years of your life to this company, Terrence. It's the least we could do. How's your wife doing?" "Much better," Terrence beamed. "And for the first time in years, I was able to attend my daughter's school play last week. I'd forgotten how good it feels to be present for those moments." As Charles bid farewell to Henry and Terrence, he found himself reflecting on the ripple effects of the changes they'd implemented. It wasn't just about work performance. It was about giving people their lives back. Making his way back to his office, Charles passed by the conference room where Linda sat, leading a training session on ethical leadership. It had been a difficult decision, demoting Linda rather than firing her outright. But Charles believed in second chances, and Linda's willingness to acknowledge her mistakes and work towards change had been genuine. Through the glass, Charles caught Linda's eye. She nodded respectfully, a far cry from the dismissive executive she'd been just weeks ago. Charles returned the nod, silently acknowledging the progress they were making together. Back in his office, Charles sank into his chair, his mind whirling with the day's interactions. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out. Lisa entered, carrying a small potted plant. "Thought your office could use a touch of green," she said with a smile, placing the plant on his desk. Charles chuckled. "Are you saying my office is dull?" "I'm saying it could use a reminder of growth," Lisa replied, her eyes twinkling. "Speaking of which, how are things progressing?" Charles leaned back, considering the question. "It's challenging," he admitted. "We're uncovering deep-seated issues that won't be fixed overnight. But there's progress. Real, tangible progress." Lisa perched on the edge of his desk. "Tell me about it." As Charles recounted the day's events, Angela's growing confidence, Henry's dedication to the task force, Terrence's gratitude, he found himself growing emotional. "You know, Lisa," he said, his voice softening, "I always thought being a CEO was about driving profits, making big deals. But this past month has taught me it's so much more than that. It's about creating an environment where everyone, from the janitor to the executive, feels valued and respected." Lisa reached out, squeezing his hand. "That's the Charles Benson I married. The one who sees people, not just numbers on a spreadsheet." Charles nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I let myself lose sight of that. I got so caught up in the race for success that I forgot what true success looks like." "And now?" Lisa prompted gently. "Now," Charles said, his voice gaining strength, "I'm committed to staying connected, to remembering that every decision I make affects real people with real lives. It's not always going to be easy, but it's necessary." Lisa smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "That's all anyone can ask for, Charles. To be seen, to be heard, to be valued." As Lisa left, Charles turned to his computer, pulling up the company-wide messaging system. He began typing out a message, inviting employees to a series of coffee with the CEO sessions. Small, informal gatherings where people from all departments could share their thoughts and ideas directly with him. Just as he hit send, another knock sounded at his door. This time, it was May, the young product developer whose ideas had been consistently overlooked. "Mr. Benson," she said hesitantly, "do you have a moment?" "Of course, May. Come in," Charles replied warmly. "And please call me Charles." May entered, clutching a tablet to her chest. I wanted to show you something." It's an idea I've been working on for improving accessibility in our products. As May began explaining her concept, Charles listened intently, asking questions and offering encouragement. The excitement in May's voice grew with each passing minute, her initial nervousness fading away. "This is brilliant, May," Charles said when she finished. "Why haven't you brought this up before?" May's smile faltered slightly. "I tried, but, well, in the past, my ideas weren't always welcomed." Charles nodded, understanding the unspoken words. "Things are different now, May. Your voice matters here. In fact, I'd like you to present this at our next product development meeting. What do you think?" May's eyes widened. "Really? Yes, I'd love to." As May left, her step noticeably lighter, Charles felt a renewed sense of purpose wash over him. This was what leadership should be about: nurturing talent, fostering innovation, and creating an environment where everyone could thrive. The day wore on, filled with meetings, decisions, and countless interactions. But unlike before, when each day blurred into the next in a haze of profit margins and market shares, Charles found himself fully present in each moment. As the office began to empty for the day, Charles decided to take one last walk through the building. He passed by Angela's office, where she was meeting with her team, her gestures animated as she explained a new initiative. He saw Henry in the break room, sharing a laugh with colleagues from various departments, a scene that would have been unthinkable just a month ago. In the product development area, May was hunched over her desk, refining her presentation. Charles made a mental note to check in with her tomorrow, to ensure she had all the support she needed. Finally, he found himself in the lobby, standing before the wall where the company's mission statement hung. The words, once mere corporate jargon, now held new meaning. At TechVision, we strive to innovate not just in our products, but in our approach to business. We believe in the power of technology to improve lives, and in the power of a positive work culture to bring out the best in every individual. Charles reached out, tracing the words with his finger. They had always been there, but somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of their true meaning. Now, they served as a daily reminder of the company's renewed commitment and his own personal pledge. As he turned to leave, Charles caught sight of his reflection in the lobby's polished floor. For a moment, he saw not the polished CEO in an expensive suit, but Charlie the janitor, pushing his cleaning cart. The memory brought a smile to his face and a renewed sense of humility to his heart. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. As Charles walked to his car, he felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. Gratitude for the journey he had undertaken, for the lessons he had learned, and for the second chance he had been given to make things right. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions to be made. But for the first time in years, Charles Benson was looking forward to facing them. Not as a distant CEO, but as a leader committed to building a truly great company, one day at a time. As he drove home, Charles couldn't help but reflect on the words of a wise person he had once heard. A true leader doesn't create followers. They create more leaders. With Angela, Henry, May, and countless others finding their voices and stepping into leadership roles, Charles felt that TechVision was finally on the right path. The road ahead would be long and undoubtedly filled with obstacles. Changing a company culture was no small feat, and there would be resistance and setbacks along the way. But as Charles pulled into his driveway, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. Lisa greeted him at the door, a knowing smile on her face. "Good day?" she asked, though the answer was written clearly in Charles's relaxed posture and bright eyes. "The best," Charles replied, pulling her into a hug. "We're making progress, Lisa. Real, meaningful progress." As they settled in for dinner, Charles shared the day's events with Lisa, his voice filled with excitement and hope for the future. And as the evening wore on, Charles Benson, CEO of TechVision, found himself looking forward to tomorrow. Not for the deals to be made or the profits to be earned, but for the lives he could touch, the potential he could unlock, and the positive change he could bring to his company and beyond. In the quiet of the night, as Charles drifted off to sleep, he held onto a simple yet powerful truth. Leadership wasn't about power or prestige. It was about service, about lifting others up, about creating an environment where everyone could shine. And with that thought, Charles Benson, once lost in the trappings of corporate success, found himself truly at peace, ready to lead TechVision into a brighter, more inclusive future. Charles's journey of humility and discovery as a janitor led to an extraordinary transformation, not just within his company, but also for everyone who learns about his story. If Charles's story resonated with you, be sure to subscribe for more inspiring stories of change and impact. And before you go, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you think you would have handled the situation if you were in Charles's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below.